All right, for a lot of guys, grail watches are like, $5,000, $10,000, $100,000 or more. They're these things that are just completely, for someone like me, completely unobtainable. For me, $750, that's grail territory. If I'm going to spend that much money on a watch, it's got to be something special. It's going to be something that I'm going to really be doing a lot of research on and really sure that that's what I want. And I think the watch we're looking at today, I think it meets a lot of the criteria that I would be looking for if I were looking for a grail watch in this territory. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Navygraf from Yema watches. Let's take a look. Hey everyone, welcome back to Just the Watch. My name's Dave, and this is a channel about budget watch collecting. So if you are also interested in budget watches, if you like reviews of, watches in that budget price range and just, talking about the hobby, definitely ask you to subscribe if you haven't already. Help me out. But today we're talking about the Navygraf from Yema. Now, I mentioned in the intro that this watch costs $750 and that's amount of money that I really need to think hard before I would go out and spend. So I'm thankful that I didn't actually have to spend it on this watch. Yema was kind enough to send it in for a review. I do get to keep it after the review is done, so big thanks to them. But please keep that in mind as I go through the review and tell you about this watch. So why do I think this watch, which I have on my wrist now, and I've had a hard time getting it off my wrist since I've gotten it, because this is probably my favorite watch that I've had sent in to me. I've just really kind of fallen in love with it, and I want to share with you guys why I think it kind of qualifies for that grail level watch. In particular, it's got three things that I think really lend it to this category. And the first is heritage. I mean, if you're thinking about grail watches, oftentimes this is one of the biggest things that you want. You want something that is special, that has a heritage behind it. And heritage isn't just about a name. It's not just about, the history of what they've done in the past. That's definitely a huge part of it. But that carries on into the making of the watch now. If you have a watch that has a good heritage behind it, that's going to tell you that the watch is coming from a quality manufacturer that has a reputation that has withstood the test of time. This is going to be, more than likely a watch that is going to be a good watch, because this is from a company that has been making watches for a long time, and Yema has that. They have been in the business since the 1940s. They are a French watch manufacturer, probably one of the most famous and well-respected French watch manufacturers, and they have been involved in all sorts of different activities with the French government, from space watches to dive watches to racing watches, all sorts of different watches that they've been into, and that's where this Navygraf comes from. It's from their dive watch heritage. And one of the things that I really love about it is just that design, that heritage. You can really see it in the look of the watch. This is not a watch that looks like a Rolex Submariner homage. It doesn't look like something that you can clearly see, oh, it came from this line, or it was a copy of this watch or that watch. It definitely has its own unique feel and identity, and yet it's very well thought out, and it just looks great. It's just a great style. And, I love that about it. I love that it has a heritage that's all of its own. Another huge part of this heritage is that not long ago, Yema came up and decided to create their own in-house automatic movement. So this watch at $750 actually has a French-made in-house automatic movement inside of it, which is crazy at this price range. A lot of manufacturers, they'll kind of, take an ETA movement or a Sleeta movement and sort of make some minor changes to it and slap their name on it. That's not what's going on here. This is actually a movement that they developed themselves in-house. They spent 2 years of R&D on it, and now they're putting it into their watches, and it's a pretty decent movement. We'll go into more of that as we go, but that's really cool to have an in-house movement like that in kind of this heritage watch that you're looking for when you're looking for sort of a grail piece. Second thing that I think makes this grail worthy is just the components that they put into it. So, not only are you getting that in-house automatic movement, you're getting sapphire crystal, decent lume, really great build quality. I mean, if you're looking for a grail watch, you want a watch that is actually a good watch. You don't want it to just be about the name and the heritage. You want it to be able to stand up to, the quality and to be worth the money that you're paying for it as a watch. I think this definitely hits that, and we'll see that more as we go through the review. And the third and final thing that I think you want out of a grail watch is just something that fits your style. And this one, it's just such a great classic style. I really love it. It's very simple. It's very understated. It's smaller. This is only a 39 millimeter case. So definitely on the smaller size for what I typically wear. But I think it just wears so great, and it just looks like just a great watch on the wrist. It doesn't look like some huge flashy thing that's going to draw a lot of attention. It's just incredibly well made. It's incredibly well thought out. It looks great. It's a great size. And just everything about the style really appeals to me. And yeah, we'll see that more as we go. So enough talking about that. Let's go ahead and jump in and take a look and talk about these things more in depth as we check out the watch itself. All right, so here is the Yema Navygraf. As far as dimensions goes, we're getting 39 millimeter diameter. You're getting 46 millimeter lug to lug, 12 millimeter thick, and then 19 millimeter lug width. So a little bit of an odd size lug width there. And as you can see on the dial, you're getting 300 meters of water resistance, or 990 feet, which I think is great to get something in this size at 12 millimeter thickness. To be able to get 300 meters of water resistance is pretty impressive. And first thing I do want to highlight on this is just the design of the watch. So like I said, I think the heritage of this one, the kind of the roots of this design, it really comes from a place of its own. It doesn't look like any other divers out on the market. It definitely has its own history behind it. And I think it's a very well thought out design. It's very legible, very easy to read. They've made a pretty good use of color. And that's, I think, one issue that I think a lot of people are a little bit concerned about is the colors are a little bit, they're not like your standard ones with the bright yellow hands and these kind of, I don't know if it's like an orange or a Fotina markers that they've got. I'm not sure if that was meant to look like a vintage thing or if that was just the color that they chose for the dial. Either way, it works really well. It's kind of a softer look. It's not like a really harsh contrast on the markers, but still very legible. And the yellow just adds some character. It doesn't look out of place. It doesn't look weird. It looks pretty good on the wrist. Yeah, it's not something that's hugely flashy or stands out. It just works really well. It looks really great on the wrist. And I really like the design and the size and kind of the modesty of this watch. It's really when you get down into the details of it, the finishing and the printing and everything, that you really appreciate this. It's just a really well put together design. You can see closely on the dial that it is an all printed dial design. You are getting some texture there. The printing on the markers is fairly heavily applied. And the markers are interesting. They call it kind of an exclamation point look, and you kind of see that where it's a bar with then a little separation and then kind of an angular dot underneath it, which I think looks really cool. It's not something that I've seen, but it really helps to center your eye on the watch really well. Just makes it really easy to pick out and read, and just really good legibility. You're getting a sapphire crystal with a sapphire bezel insert, and the bezel is fully lumed. We'll get to lume shot in a little bit here. The bezel is a 90 click bezel with some of the best action that I've felt on a watch. It is also extremely easy to grip. You'll notice that the bezel rises up fairly high from the mid case. It has a very interesting case design, and that makes it really easy to grip this bezel. You got a lot of area that you can hold on to, and so it's one of the easiest bezels that I've played around with. Yeah, it just turns really smoothly, has a really satisfying click to it with almost zero backplay. Again, it is a 90 click bezel, so it's different from the typical 120 click that a lot of people are used to, but I didn't have any issue with that at all. The case finishing is all brushed, and the brushing is very finely done. It's really excellent brushing, really looks good in a lot of different lighting situations. And you get some nice contrast with the kind of the smooth sapphire bezel insert being very kind of reflective to contrast against that brushing. I think it looks really great. Now the case is very interesting the way they've designed it. Again, you've kind of got this sort of midsection where the lugs sort of jut out that really sort of gives you some separation between the top and the bottom. So it almost looks like a 3-layer case where you've got this middle section with the lugs and the crown guard just kind of sticking out. It's very interesting. I really like the way that it looks. And again, it's a lot different from almost any other dive watches that I've seen. You're also getting drilled lugs on there, which makes for a lot easier strap changes. Again, I think the whole watch is very much a tool watch. This is very well thought out from a functionality standpoint. I do want to talk about the movement in here because it is Yema's in-house automatic movement. This is the MPB 1000. This is a 28,000 beats per hour movement, so you get the very smooth sweep of the second hand. If you were able to slow down and look at it, you would be able to see that you get 8 individual ticks per second compared to what you often find in more entry-level movements of that 6 ticks per second. So that really smooth sweep is definitely something you can appreciate, especially with that really bright yellow second hand going around. Has a 48-hour power reserve, bidirectional winding, so it's really really quiet on the wrist. It's not something that I ever really noticed or felt it. Just really unobtrusive movement. 31 joules, and this one in my testing was getting about negative 2.8 seconds per day on the accuracy, so really good on the accuracy as well. So overall, pretty pleased with the movement. And again, it's just so cool that it is a French design, French made, in-house automatic movement. You can get it on this bracelet, which is very well made and well designed. It's kind of a very thin but very solid bracelet. It's very comfortable on the wrist. You're getting from that 19 millimeters down to a little bit of a taper here, down to the clasp. And the clasp is double secure. You just kind of flip that and then pull it. Milled clasp with a dive extension. And the dive extension is also milled, so very solid there. You're also getting 4 micro adjusts. And the clasp is just really well made. It's the kind of thing that, you know, you kind of can take it off in your spare time and just play around with it. Lots of very satisfying clicks. Just a really, really well made clasp. And then on the case back, you can see that Yema crest, which looks really cool. Solid, simple case back. Really like that there. The crest, if you run your finger across it, it is fairly sharply etched in there. So that was something that is just a little interesting. I don't know, almost alarmingly sharp when you rub your thumb against it, but not to the point where you scratch or cut yourself or anything like that. One interesting thing to note about the bracelet is that the first links that attach, they kind of don't bend very far. They're sort of, this is as far as they bend, so you kind of get some extra space in there. Now they do drop down pretty sharply, so I don't think that'll be much of a problem as far as wearability goes, and I haven't had any issue with it, but that's just an interesting thing. This is definitely not the kind of thing where that first link is going to fold back. The first link is kind of stiff there. But that didn't seem to be any issue at all when it was actually on the wrist. So that's a kind of a design feature that I'm unfamiliar with. But generally it wears just fine. On the wrist, the watch just feels great. I just have really fallen in love with this smaller size. It's much smaller than most other divers that I've worn. But that 39 millimeter, it just wears so well. It's nice and thin as well. So you get just really comfortable, really easy to wear with long sleeves or short sleeves. And it's just so unobtrusive. You kind of forget that it's there until you need to check the time and look at it. And I think just that size really looks very elegant, very kind of, again, a little bit more mature. I think it looks like a watch should look. It doesn't look too out of proportion. It doesn't, it's not like a big noticeable piece. It just looks like a really nice watch on the wrist. All right, so here's the lume on the watch, and it's very nice lume. It's not spectacular. It's not super bright. It's not like Seiko level kind of lume, and I think this watch just kind of isn't that kind of a watch. I think, definitely with the choice of colors that they picked on the dial, that's kind of going to limit the absolute brightness that they're going to be able to get on the watch. But the lume is very functional. It looks very pleasant, and it is definitely easily bright enough to read. So with that sort of preference there, we are going to go ahead and throw this up against some other watches in my collection. I actually have a lot of new ones into review, so we've got some new ones here making the stage. Going from left to right, we have the Seiko Samurai, the Citizen Nighthawk, the SWC Diver, and then in the middle there we have the Yema Navygraf. And then next to it we have a Hemel chronograph and a Spinnaker Flus chronograph. And this time I went ahead and ran through at a 2-hour time lapse to give it a little bit more time running through. Now for results, it was basically tied for last place with the Flus on the hand brightness. And it came out with a slight edge on marker brightness, beating out both the Hemel and the Flus there, just barely. So definitely not the kind of lume that will go toe-to-toe with the big boys, but still a pretty pleasant lume that it's got there. Okay, let's talk the pros and cons of the Yema Navygraf, and I think we've hit the pros pretty well as we've gone through this review. Obviously, the heritage, the in-house automatic movement, the style, the design, the build quality, the looks of the watch, all of those are just outstanding. And I think altogether it makes for a really appealing value, even at this $750 price range. Again, this is a price range that I've never gone up to myself, but I can definitely see in the package that they put together that it is easily worth that. And again, it's the kind of thing I would have expected it to be priced even higher for all that they're offering in this watch. And then as far as negatives go, there's not really any huge negatives that I had to complain about. There's a couple of odd quirks and minor things, so I'll go through those. But none of these really are things that I would necessarily find as actual faults of the watch. But there are some things to be sort of aware of. So let's go through those. One of them was with the bracelet when I first put it on. It was the weirdest thing. This is a metal bracelet, which again, I really love the bracelet, but it has some quirks to it. And one of them was when I first put it on. For about the first 45 minutes or so, it was pulling arm hairs like crazy. And I have no idea why, because after that, it basically completely stopped and it hasn't done that at all. So I don't know if it was just the bracelet was a little sticky coming out of the packaging, or if it just needed to loosen up or what. But that was an odd thing. And at first when I put it on, I was kind of disappointed. It's like, am I just going to have to get used to having my arm hair getting pulled around on this? And yeah, so it was an odd first experience. But again, that's basically completely gone away. It now wears just as comfortably as any other decent made bracelet I have in my collection. Along with that, this also has a 19 millimeter lug width, which is an odd size lug width. It's a little bit of a bummer having that. I would have definitely preferred to have 20 millimeters. But again, if I'm thinking of this as more like a grail watch, as like, sort of the pinnacle of my collection, it's the kind of watch that I wouldn't mind spending a little bit of money to buy watch straps just for this one. It is getting easier to find 19 millimeter watch straps. I've got one from Barton that I think looks great on this. I've ordered one from Uncle Seiko, which they make dive style straps for, originally for Seiko watches, but they make a lot of 19 millimeter straps. So I've got a 19 millimeter Tropic rubber coming from Uncle Seiko that I'll be putting this on. So I'm not too upset about that. And then even on top of that, it's like, at 19 millimeters, you can squeeze a lot of 20 millimeter straps on there. You can put a 20 millimeter NATO on without too much issue. It's not going to look too weird. You can put on a 20 millimeter elastic strap. Those will fit on there as well. They're, flexible enough that they'll sort of be able to squeeze in there. So that wasn't as big of an issue as I thought it would be. Another minor complaint is that this is a no-date watch, so there's no date on the dial. However, the movement, which is, again, their in-house automatic movement, it has a date position on the movement. So if you pull the crown out to the second position, there is a ghost date there. You can feel it clicking around. I'm assuming they haven't created a no-date version of that movement yet, or maybe that's something that's on the horizon. But as of now, this one I did notice did have a ghost date position on there. And this being a no-date watch, that's something that I typically prefer to have a date on a watch. For a daily watch, a date is a complication that I use quite frequently. But not having it on there, I really actually kind of appreciate the sort of simplicity and the symmetry of it. It looks great without a date, but I still would like to have a date on there, but that's personal preference. Yeah, so that wraps it up for the review of the Yema Navygraf. If you guys are like me, if you're looking for like a watch to save up for and get, I think this is definitely one to check out. I think this is really kind of took me by surprise. I didn't have any expectations going into this. I didn't know much at all about Yema, but it very quickly became the watch that I was just grabbing all the time and just really enjoying and always having on my wrist. And it's definitely one I'm going to be hanging on to because, yeah, this is just a fantastic watch. So with all that said, thank you guys for watching. Definitely leave me your comments down below and let me know what you guys think if you guys have any experience yourself with Yema. But that will go ahead and wrap up the review for today. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.